good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope you are all well. Before we get started, I have a quick question. I've gotten some requests for true crime stories. I did a community post, but I understand not a lot of people read those. So, in the comments of this video below, please let me know if you would love a true crime video. I have fallen in love with the Unsolved Mysteries series, and you all seem to like those as well. So please let me know down below if you would love to hear true crime. I've always been told I had a voice for it, and I really would love to bring that creep factor to this channel. Also, for those of you that saw the little short 1.5 minute video I had posted on Wednesday, I claimed that I will be doing live reads, which I will be doing, and if it takes off, I'll be doing a live read on Saturday as well. I like the fact that you guys can see the guy behind the camera. I may not be the best looking guy, but I really do enjoy reading to you all live. That way I can interact with you in real time instead of interacting with you in the comments, which that still doesn't bother me, but I would rather speak to you in real time because that's how much I adore all of you all for supporting this channel. And I appreciate all of you from the bottom of my heart. With that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Now, sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and enjoy this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Backwoods Stories. After this introduction, an ad will play. I'll read the first story, and after that, there'll be no more ads played. Enjoy. I am new to all of this, so I wanted to share an experience I had back in 2018 during the spring. I have had a few what would be considered paranormal experiences in my life, but this was the most recent and unnerving. I am an avid outdoorsman and love to hunt and camp around the Francis Marion and Sumter National Forest. Back in 2018, I took my young son and dog out to a remote area in the National Forest to test out a new camper shell on my recently purchased truck. We found a secluded area off a dirt road, made dinner, and then packed it in for the night as soon as it got dark. Around 11 p.m. at night, I sat up and looked out the back of the truck due to my dog growling. In the distance, I saw what looked like hundreds of small white balls of light darting around, then hovering for a few seconds and slowly converging to our campsite. They looked just like the dust orbs you see on videos, but these were producing light in a completely dark forest. They soon surrounded my truck. Seemed like hundreds of them. They were a white, soft light, and they didn't blink. Lightning bugs were out early, but those were yellow and blinking. After 30 minutes of them floating around and concentrating around us, I finally worked up the nerve to open the truck and lit a lantern, and they promptly disappeared. After turning off the lights and locking back up, they came back. My son was fast asleep, thank goodness. I watched them until I finally fell asleep at around 1 a.m. The next morning, when we tried to leave, the battery was dead on the new truck. There wasn't any lights in the back cab where we had used any power. A week later, I had to replace the electric control module. Not sure if that is relevant info, but I thought I would add it. Has anyone had a similar experience? Just thinking about them again makes the hair stand up on my neck. Backpacking or camping with my family of 4 near a river in a remote canyon in very wild area last summer was quite blissful, until waking up at around 2 a.m. to a very distressing sound. We were sleeping in our hammocks very close to the river, and at about 40 feet behind us was a tall canyon wall. The sound made me think of an injured animal that was very cat-like. It was coming from behind us towards the wall of the canyon. It was regular, occurring like clockwork every 15 to 20 seconds. We shined flashlights and spoke very loudly in hopes of frightening it away from us. There was no moon out, and we could see very little, but shining our flashlights around revealed nothing as well. It sounded so very close. Our efforts did not work at all, and it seemed relentless and unfazed by us in every way. I worried it was rabid or hurt. At one point, I heard it near the river on the other side of us, and was incredibly confused as to how it was able to move around without us hearing it. I sat on the edge of my hammock until dawn with my knife in hand, waiting for a wild or sick animal to come out of the bushes at any moment, and I have to fight for our lives. Finally, around dawn, the sounds got less frequent and eventually stopped. After hiking out, we Googled many different animal sounds, and the closest we could find to what we were hearing was a mountain lion mating call. There were definitely lions in that area, so I believe that's what we heard. Still confused as to why it stayed so very close to us and was not scared away as most animals would be. We have seen black bear in this area many times, and they have always run the other way on seeing humans and cats, or even more elusive. Needless to say, I think we're gonna skip that campsite the next time we decide to go camping. Me and 4 of my buddies drew into a 2-day hunt on a reserve. Day 1 at about 8:30 in the morning, about 500 yards from my spot, my buddy filmed a fat black bear. We only had muzzle loaders. They are like Civil War style guns. You get one shot, then you gotta reload with the ramrod and everything else. I never saw any deer, so at 2 p.m. after lunch, me and another buddy scout for a different spot. We find a hellacious animal trail and he drops me off. I tell him pick me up, I'll be on the road after dark. He's about 7 miles away. I sit there from 2 p.m. till dark. All I see are loads of elk. The trail wasn't deer, it was elk highway. So it gets dark and I creep down to the road. Right at dusk, almost too dark to see something, crashes into the thick bushes about 30 yards in front of me across the road. I think, maybe it's a deer. So I grunt call just to get a reaction. Nothing. So I creep on thinking I can bust it if it's a deer. It doesn't budge. He just sniffed like a dog. Sniff, sniff, sniff. I kick the ground and stomp trying to bump it. It just keeps sniffing. I remember that bear and I'm 10 feet from whatever this is. I slowly back into a feed plot behind me with my one shot at my hip. I'm gonna have to hip shoot if it's a bear. I get 50 yards in the middle of a field plot. A big bull elk off to my right in the full moonlight. I see something drive out of the bushes into the thicket across the road to my left, so I'll run farther out. It's a standoff. I shine my light into the thicket, and I see eyes reflecting back. They look 8 inches apart, 4 foot off the ground. It's just sniffing over and over. I'm like, where's my bro? It's full dark and this thing is stalking me using cover. My buddy lights start shining down the road, and this thing crashes through the bushes anyway. I figured it's a bear, but I don't know. I was turtle heading, I'm not gonna lie. I had one shot in the dark. Coyotes were howling like crazy too. Predators were out in full effect on the full moon night. Needless to say, I don't think we'll be visiting that spot ever again. Back in 2021, my family took a trip to Lake St. Titla in North Carolina. A beautiful lake that's rich in Native American history and surrounded by mountain trails. We decided to go on one of these trails on an overcast day. I am not an athletic person and suffer from asthma, so I was behind the rest of my family by myself. About almost halfway through the hike, I heard my sister yell my birth name, but it sounded like it was off the trail. She never calls me by my real name, just my nickname I've had since I was a baby. It sounded like she was scared, so I was very tempted to run off and find her. But I knew my sister wasn't stupid. She wouldn't go off the trail even in case of an emergency. I quickly caught up with the rest of my family, and my sister was there with them, resting on some rocks next to a waterfall, chatting away and taking pictures. I asked my sister if she had called my name. She didn't know what I was talking about. She had been talking to our dad the entire time. I don't know what called my name that day, but I'm glad I didn't listen to it. Who knows what would have happened to me? I haven't been to that trail since this encounter. I don't have a clue what called my name. If you're educated on Appalachian folklore, please give me some insight on what happened to me that day. My ex-husband and I left a beach town. We were there visiting friends, another couple, at their cottage all day and evening. We just left as the sun went down at around 9:30 p.m. We took the highway there, but I hate highway driving, so my ex took the supposed scenic route home. He drove rural roads and we wound up at a stop sign, a T intersection. We turned right or left. No road ahead, only trees. Okay. He went right, knowing that should be west towards our home. Minutes later, we were back at the stop sign and T intersection. Odd. So my ex turned left next, knowing it was the wrong direction, east, did it anyway. And minutes later, we came to the same stop sign again. All ad, no embellishments. The road that kept leading us to this stop sign was acres of corn on both sides. Also, farmhouses with interior lights on. People home and awake. Anyway, The third time, I can tell he was a bit rattled but wouldn't share. He said, "I'm turning right and you," meaning me, "watch for any road signs." I did, and he did too from the left driver's side. Nothing, just tree lines. We ended up back at the stop sign again. My ex said, "F this," and hit reverse. He pulled backwards on the gravel road halfway into a farm driveway to turn around, then went back the way we came or entered the road. From there, we did get home. My ex will never admit the eeriness of that night. Our going on a semi-loop 3 times. Perhaps in the bright light of day, the road would have made sense, but this was the only time I've ever seen my ex frantic and panicked. Even as a skeptic, he knew something was off, continually arriving at the same stop sign. We were older, in our 40s. I might not be explaining the circumstances well. Still, it's the gospel truth. I also want to point out my ex had and has an uncanny knack for directions. Better now with GPS, etc. He had it innately at the time and before. When he reversed and gunned it backwards, I knew he was afraid. He's a wonderful, kind person. He'll never talk about it though. Anything weird that happened that night. So, a little background. I am from Spain, with family from Italy. This story is 100% true. Me, my dad, and my brother are all 3 familiar with camping, nature, etc. We don't get scared easily, and we aren't really superstitious or whatever. Also, excuse me for any grammatical errors I might make in this. English is not my first language. Now, on to the story. This happened in 2010, I believe. I was 8 years old then, and we were on summer vacation in Italy, in the region of Tuscany, where some of our family is born. We, brother, dad, and me, were hiking in the country, far from any towns or any other form of big civilization. We were not very familiar with this route though. All of a sudden, we stumble across what looks like an abandoned Tuscan farmhouse. Not very big though. We all look around and yell, asking whether there was someone there. It looked very abandoned. The door was missing. Plants all growing over the place. Safe to say, no one lived there. So, since we love adventure, and it didn't seem like a bad plan to do with 2 children, we decided to take a look at the place. As we are going to enter the house, out of nowhere comes a barn owl flying out of the house. It was dark in there. So we had a quick scare, but nothing too bad. It's just an owl, right? Now, we enter the house and we just find the typical stuff you would imagine to find when you're in an abandoned house. Cutlery and plates on the ground, a candle, some old paintings. Nothing really valuable though. Now we see an old wooden ladder that leads up to a hole in the ceiling. It was not a very big hole. My father couldn't fit. To give you an idea, he's like 6'2". And so, since I was the oldest of the 2 kids, I would go up and tell them what I saw upstairs. Now, I went up the ladder and got in the room, where I could see barely because the windows were covered with wood boards. So I could make out some stuff by a few sun rays that would get in through the gaps. I could see graffiti signs, typical for an abandoned house, right? And I saw another room, so I told my father and brother that I would advance to there and see what was up. As I opened the rotten wooden door, I immediately stood still. A disgusting, rotten smell penetrated my nose. I almost had to throw up. I wanted to know what caused this bad smell. Then, in the corner of the room, I could make out a silhouette. I got closer to investigate what it could be, and I could barely make out that it was the lifeless body of a dog. A big dog. And, spicy detail, the body was skinned. No fur, nothing. Just pure, rotting flesh in the shape of a big dog. I don't remember how long I just stood there frozen. But I woke from my shock with the screams of my brother because apparently the barn owl had gotten back inside the house and it almost hit him. So my dad yelled at me to come back and I gladly obeyed. When I got back downstairs, I told him what I had seen, and the look he gave me was that of a man who was scared to shit, but doesn't want to admit it in order to not scare his young kids. He just got close to my ear and whispered to run. We ran out of that place and never got back, or even close to the route leading to it. Now, it might not be very scary compared to other stories on this page or very backwoods related, but I thought I'd give it a go since someone said they wanted to hear stories from outside the northern American sphere. It was still in the country part, and there were woods around it though. I am sorry in advance for my English. When I was a teenager around 2004, we used to sneak down through a quiet area of scrub, over the dunes onto the beach to smoke weed. I lived in a very small coastal town on the mid-north coast in north-south Wales. Typical wildlife was possums, wallabies, and maybe the occasional kangaroo. Definitely no dingoes, crocs, or other apex predators around. One night, as we quietly made our way down the path, we noticed a shuffling, rustling sound in the undergrowth near the path. We stopped moving, and the sound seemed to stop as well. There was absolutely zero light except for some houses in the distance and the moon. After a brief pause, we decided to keep moving. We heard the rustling sound again, and this time noticed some brushes moving. We stopped and my friend whispered, "Holy shit, did anyone else see the trees move?" I whispered back, "I only saw the bushes move." We stood there frozen for a few beats. In my head, I was weighing up the option to either continue on the path or leg it back home. We took a few more steps forward when we heard the sound like leaves crunching underfoot. At that point, I reached out and grabbed my friend's hand, thinking maybe we were being followed by someone. It was right then I noticed I could smell something awful. "What the F is that smell?" my mate whispered. His voice came out so small it frightened me even more. We stood there for so long, for probably only a minute or two, until we heard a low groan and growl sound coming from a few meters away. Now, brush-tailed possums are quite common in the area and are known to make a kind of grunting and coughing sound heard here, but they are, from the ones I've heard, distinctively higher pitched and more chirpy sounding than what we heard. This was a low and more sonorous sound, kind of like with some scratch-catching sound at the end. Needless to say, we wordlessly booked it straight back up the path that we came. It sounded to me like a huge commotion of leaves crunching and branches shaking and crashing behind us as we ran. But reflecting on it, with my adult hindsight, it definitely could have been us making all that noise. We never went back to that spot again, and would bring it up from time to time, trying to speculate what could have followed us that night. Our best theories were that it was just a bloody big possum or a person trying to scare us. The biggest issues we would argue over was why would a possum follow us, let alone down on the ground? Although my mate says he saw the tree branches move as well. And if it was a person, how did they make that sound? And what was that smell? And why didn't we hear any footfall? Maybe it was just a coincidence of events? A person following us, a nearby possum growling, and a nearby dead animal stink wafting over at just the right movement. It still makes me shiver to think about it to this day. I've always wanted to go into the Navy because of my Uncle Grandpa. You heard that correctly. My Uncle Grandpa. My parents divorced when I was 2. After that, my mom's mom fell for one of my dad's 7 uncles, Viola. My family tree now has a circle. Sometimes he was Pawpaw. Sometimes he was Uncle Doug. It depended on which part of the family was involved in the conversation. Verified on the books. Real life. Uncle Grandpa. He was about 5'2", maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. Short, cropped hair. Neat, tight, and slicked back every day. Always dressed sharp. Not elegant, but sharp. Everything he wore had perfect creases, even his pajamas. But he was not to be underestimated. He was strong. I remember his arms were tight and corded, their skin dark from the now indecipherable tattoos he'd worn for 40 years. He smelled of Marlboro Reds and Folgers from the can. He drank coffee like it was his job. It was. He worked delivery and maintenance for a business-oriented coffee service. He had the same industrial 4-pot machine, the type you'd see at a Waffle House, on his kitchen counter for longer than I'd been alive. The same machine sits on my parents' counter now. It will probably outlive me. I spent a lot of my youth at Pawpaw's. Shaky finances and trickle-down economics didn't give us much money for luxuries like roofs and walls. So we stayed with my grandparents for many of my formative years. I always looked up to him. He was as brash as you'd expect a salty, sawed-off sailor to be. He feared nothing except snakes. He hated snakes. I once saw him go manic on a tiny green garden snake with a garden hoe. His ferocity led me to think there was something deeper than just man versus snake going on. He knew that snake's name. There was history there. He OJ'd that snake. The fact that he had been a Navy man for 20 years was the only convincing I needed to make me want to join as well. He once told me that the Navy was the best branch to join because you always had a real bed to sleep in as long as you made it. I want to share a story, nay, a legend about my pawpaw pieced together from the fragments I remember from what I was told in '92 and retellings heard in the years since. This all happened 40 years before that. Pawpaw eventually lost his cage match with the Marlboro Man, and I missed that foul-mouthed, no F's given, crazy old asshole. I loved him a lot. I feel like this is a story he'd want out there in the clouds somewhere, living even though he had left, so I'll do my best to recreate what happened based on secondhand hearsay told to a teenager at a family reunion 30 years ago. I still don't know if I really believe it, but Pawpaw had a shitload of scars to show off, and pretty much the whole family backed him up on it at the reunion. Uncle Grandpa, aka Pawpaw, aka Uncle Doug, and 3 of his brothers were in the woods of northern Mississippi. They'd all grown up country as F and loved killing their own food for nostalgia. My Uncle Howard had a big house out there. This was back in the old days when people could buy property of their own and build a house on one income. It was deep in the woods on the edge of a little cliff. Very defensible. He knew the lay of the land. They had permanent tree stands set up, salt blocks laid out. Uncle Howard's property was isolated, so they could do pretty much anything they wanted. Hell, there may be bodies up there for all I know. 4 brothers walked into the woods that day. Little did they know, only 3 would return unscathed. They had taken their positions, high above the forest floor in their stands. They waited. Proper hides had been built as the wooden perches were improved over the years. They were practically tree houses after decades of annual use and additions. They couldn't see each other, but were within shouting distance. There were no cell phones back then. Screaming was their Snapchat, but they remained quiet. You don't want to spook the deer. Anyone who's been hunting knows it's a waiting game. You don't just go into the woods and find 20 deer lined up waiting to be your dinner. It's high stakes hide and seek. You have to show up at the crack of dawn on a cold day when you can see your breath turn into snow when you exhale. You climb a tall ash tree and sit there, watching, waiting, pissing into a Gatorade bottle so the scent of your urine doesn't spook the prey. But you don't make noise. This wasn't their first rodeo. They'd been hunting these woods for decades. This was their home. They knew the way around this land better than they knew their way to church. The silence shatters. Its vaguely familiar yet wholly alien shriek. A roar blended with a scream, garnished with a dash of shriek rips through the trees. Birds take flight. The forest floor ripples from critters scattering beneath the leaves. The sound sends a chill down the spine of every human in a 1,000-yard radius. all four of them. The inhuman noise begins to fade. The brothers could hear it moving away. The trees created a cacophony of echoes that made it hard to pinpoint where the sound had gone. They knew it was going away, but they didn't know where. The silence, having been splintered to shards by some thing, further crumbles as the brothers call out. They had no need to fear spooking the game at this point. Howard takes charge of the moment. Walter? Yeah, I'm okay. What the F was that? I don't know. Tony, you okay? Yeah, man. What the hell? Doug? Doug? The others join in. Doug! Douglas! Doug is silent. Frantic men scramble as fast as young grandpas are able, traveling toward the ground fast enough to know they'll feel that in the morning. The brothers converged on a crime scene. The sickly smell of blood welcomed their arrival. They stood around the tree that they knew their brother should have been in. Their boots, once soaked with morning dew, now shine crimson from the bloodbath at their feet. The bark was wet with a splash of blood. Leaves were matted together. Insects were drowning in the ichor, and Doug was gone. Tony bolted up the tree like a lineman with a dead line, vanishing into the blind above. His gun's still there. The loss in his voice was tangible. Brothers began to call out for their wayward sibling. Doug! This isn't funny. Doug! Where are you, asshole? Having all served at some point in one branch or another, they returned to protocols. They had a contingency plan in place and fell into it immediately. They all knew where the car was. Protocol states that when a member of the team is MIA, start the clock and double time it back to the car. When the clock hits 30 minutes, haul ass to town and start making calls. So they waited, just as the plan started. They made it back to the car in 15, which was good time for grandpas. They hovered around the car, pacing. Howard chewed his fingernails to the quick. Tony's cheeks wore the streaks of worried tears. Walter sat behind the wheel watching the clock and preparing to tear ass to town in 5 minutes and 37 seconds. 36. 35. 34. Hey, Tony, go F yourself. 3 distraught heads pop up like NARRATED scanning for danger. So much blood. Small in stature, bathed in red, Uncle Grandpa Doug emerges from the tree line. His face and arms are peppered with open wounds. Some ooze, some drip, some weep, one flows. His clothes bear the rips and tears of something unspeakable. Doug plods from the tree line. His brothers rush to meet, ready to question him. He looks Tony in his eyes. Something is said without a word. Tony looks at his feet like a scolded child. I'm not dragging this damn thing to the truck myself. Come on. Pawpaw turns and begins to disappear among the trees again. More questions than answers trail them as they follow a blood-soaked halfling to the site of a brutal slaying. Glassy eyes and a lolled tongue are unnecessary signs of the beast's death. It's obvious from the wounds that it was done. Gashes cover the carcass from the neck up. The skyward side of the animal was peppered with what looked to be a Morse code message carved into the flesh. An ineligible riddle of stabs and slices wrote the beast's eulogy on its skin. The steel shard rising from the deer's skull played the final note of its life. 7 ossified points rise up to frame the broken blade that will rest between them until bone becomes dust. Uncle Grandpa filled them in as they manhandled the carcass back to the truck. He had been in his tree stand, playing the waiting game. He heard motion. Directly below him, nibbling through the leaves, tan and well-fed, 7 points of meat. Thrilled with his good fortune and the prospect of a short hunt, he raised his rifle. He took a deep breath and held it. Finger on the trigger. Squeeze. Click. He exhales a sigh, then a whisper. F you, Tony. A history of pranks parades through his thoughts. A wet willy while sleeping. Being locked in the bathroom after Dad contaminated the oxygen supply. And a new classic. Replacing your brother's ammo with dummy rounds before the big hunting trip. High effing hilarious. Pawpaw was stuck. No gun. A feast on the forest floor below. An asshole brother out there somewhere laughing at him. He was pissed. He checked his ammo. All dummies. A hint of a smile plays across Doug's face. No. F. Tony. He thinks to himself as he looks at the prey grazing below. He didn't have a gun. Shooting the beast was off the table. He didn't want to spook it and send it straight toward one of his brothers. This was his kill. He assessed the situation and made a decision. He no longer had his rifle, but he still had the high ground and his trusty Kabar knife. It would have to do. He didn't have a lot of details to share because the chaotic nature of the moment, but he drew his blade, lined himself up, and took a leap of faith. His brothers heard him land. He held on for life just as the deer was running for its own. The creature's antlers swung wildly in its panic. It kicked and bucked, trying to dislodge the spiteful sailor from its back. Somehow, Pawpaw managed to keep 3 limbs wrapped around the animal, while limb number 4 was attempting to outdo the pelleted woodpecker in pokes per second. I don't know what they must have talked about while hauling a 300-pound animal with maybe 10 pounds of unusable meat left on it back to the truck. I like to imagine the conversation involved my uncles repeating, "What the F is wrong with you?" and "Do you need a doctor?" a lot as they hiked. Knowing him, he never went to the doctor. When he got home, he probably cleaned, bandaged, and stitched all of his wounds, put on his robe, and watched Matlock through a cloud of nicotine. I think of all the parental figures in my life, he was the one I most wanted to become. He was my idol. Not because he murdered a 300-pound herbivore with nothing but a knife and a dream. He was my idol because he was crazy enough to try. I figured if the Navy could make a hobbit into a crazy badass like that, sign me up. Sadly, I couldn't join, but every time I see a naval craft or a sailor on leave in their uniform, I think of my pawpaw and honor his memory with a hearty F. Bambi. Part 1. I had a job in another city. I'm from a town, not a city. Though my town is now a city, if that makes sense. I'm pointing this out because at the time, things were very rural. Got a job through a good friend. Her 2 older sisters worked at the same place. They carpooled, alternated weeks of driving when I was hired. I was included in the rotation. 1 week driving, 3 weeks not. We'd meet at the central area in our small town and proceeded from there. Only pointing this out because sometimes there were 4 of us, or 3, or 2, or 1, depending on if someone had an appointment. Leaving early would drive herself. Holidays, you get the picture. The, not so sure what to call it, cut through between our town to the highway to work was a rural road. Not a desolate royal road. It was a paved road, houses here and there. It was, or still is, winding with small hills and rural, but for one clear flat stretch. After the last hilly dip, there is a library, converted house, and a mom-and-pop gas station. Neither are decrepit. It's honestly a lovely little village. That would be pushing it. Take a few miles to get to the library and gas station from either direction, and that's all there is. No other amenities, not even a school. Anyway, after that last small dip, there's a flat expanse. Farmhouse and fields to the right. Trees and an embankment to the river. Big river. To the left. The riverside is across the opposite lane, just to make that clear. No barriers, though. Trees and a steep embankment. The river is at the bottom, but there's no way anybody would reach the river in a vehicle, not even a semi-truck. The trees would mostly likely stop a car at some point from the river. Plus, there's a landing ground at the bottom before the river's edge. The embankment, though, it's pretty steep. Someone could easily be killed rolling over, etc. When I was a kid, my mother drove this route thousands of times, back and forth with my sister and I to our trailer. Every weekend from May to late September. Never felt off then. Mind you, as a child, even teen, I was oblivious. Plus, my mom was never driving it in the dark. Back to much later in life. The work commute on this road. The flat stretch of the road gave me the heebie-jeebies. Not the bands or hills at the start or end of the road. The small distance, a few hundred yards, a flat expanse. Just off. This is the only place and situation in my life where I felt heavy without knowing why. I dread the length as an adult. My stomach would fall. Every time. I attributed my dread to the old farmhouse. Why? Because it was the only tangible thing on that stretch. Nothing else to the right or left in terms of a house or barn. This farmhouse was pretty and well maintained, occupied. Cars in the driveway. But my sense of doom came from it. My intuition was on, but out of focus. 2 weeks into the commute with my friend and her sisters, we came upon a car driven up a tree. Bear in mind, we were on this road 7 a.m. Monday to Friday. Darkness in winter, sunshine in summer. Bright summer daylight, and we encountered a car looking like it drove up a tree. The riverside. No trees on the other, as I mentioned. Fields, yes, and cornfields, though. They're low in early summer, plus the one lone farmhouse. The car was resting on back tires, upright. It didn't appear to be a fatality. The front was crunched in from the impact, but the windshield wasn't broken or any other windows. No occupant that we could see. We all figured a deer darted out and the driver swerved and weirdly wound up there. When we were returning home at around 4:20 p.m. that day, no evidence of the car. No reports in local newspapers regarding an accident. Yeah, we all checked. So a whew moment in terms of the driver walked away. No regular cells back then and little internet, but as far as I know, many years later, no one was hurt driving up the tree. I only bring this car incident and accident into play with hindsight, a prelude of things to come. Part 2. A couple of years after taking this job, my friend's one sister retired and the other wanted to work different hours. It was down to 2 and commuting. My friend, I'll call her F, and myself. My turn to drive one shitty snow, rain, slush winter morning. Pitch black too at 7 a.m. winter, which almost adds to the fun. Woohoo. Made it through the bendy hills of that rural road, and as soon as I reached the flat part, going very slowly, my car did a 180. Spun around the opposite direction, across the other lane, and started sliding to the trees and embankment. I had no control. I couldn't brake or do anything because I wasn't in forward or reverse. The car was careening sideways. Surreal is an overused term, but it was exactly that. Surreal. Like slow, blurry motion, even though it would have been seconds. I said to my friend, "I'm sorry, F," thinking we were about to tumble down the embankment and stop. My car simply stopped. It was eerie. We were both silent, as in, how did we just stop? We sat there for a few seconds in shock. Then I went to pull away, rattled as shit, and my car was dead. I never turned it off. Just dead. The power locks also activated. It was an old car, no automatic locks. We were locked in. Hand on the heart truth. I figured out the locks after a few seconds, but the car still wouldn't start. We walked to the mom and pop gas station, hoping they'd be open soon. Never did open while we huddled in the alcove. F had a cell phone and called her son-in-law to pick us up, which he did, but took him a long time. After an hour in the cold, sheltered a bit by the storefront, still, we were both shaking. The cold and circumstances. Sil showed up and asked if I wanted him to try and start my car. Yes. Drove my car and more shock. There it sat perfectly aligned, like I'd pulled over to park, not spun out of control. Embankment drop about 2 feet away, yet my car immaculately straight, parked on a dime. We never saw that in the dark, exiting the car. More surprise, Sil got in and my car started, no problem. What in the actual hell? I had F drive with me to take her home with her son-in-law following us in case my car died. No problems. Dropping her off, and Sil went on his way and I headed to my home I've never been so tired in my life. I went to bed and slept for hours, even though only being awake for less than 3 hours. Compared notes with F the next day, and she remembered everything as I did, and also slept for hours once home. Though it was only about 8:30 a.m. for both of us when getting to our respective houses. I'm going to call being out in the cold for an hour plus as an explanation. I'm not religious at all, but I described it at the time as a divine intervention. Like a huge invisible hand came down and stopped my car from toppling down the embankment. How everything was slow motion, though it wasn't in reality, mere seconds and zero control. Yet, we abruptly stopped. No jolt. There's nothing on that side of the road to stop. No fencing. Not even snowbanks at the time. Nothing. We simply stopped. F agreed, 100%. Still does. Exact same memory, and more. Since she had the passenger side view, she later told me she was frantically looking for anything to stop the car out of her window. There was nothing. She was bracing herself to go down the embankment. Me too. After this event, I was still eyeballing the farmhouse at the time. Car up a tree and my car almost diving were across from this house. I won't keep anybody in suspense. It's not the house. Or better put, the house might also contribute. I don't know. What I do know is the heaviness never left driving that one stretch. To or from, day or night, for 5 years, I'd tense up. There's more about this road and a possible conclusion, at least for me. It's creepy AF, and I have never been on it again since leaving that job 8 to 9 years ago. I'll continue if anybody is interested. Again, it's the gospel truth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'll never go into the woods again. Journal entry number 1, May 1st. I don't know how I ended up here. I was hiking in the woods and suddenly found myself lost. I've been wandering for hours, but I can't seem to find my way back to the trail. The sun is starting to set, and I'm getting scared. I keep hearing strange noises, like something is following me. I need to find shelter for the night. Journal entry number 2, May 2nd. Last night was a nightmare. I found a small cave to sleep in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I heard growling and scratching outside the cave, but it was too dark to look. I barely slept at all. This morning, I found claw marks on the rocks outside the cave. I don't know what kind of animal it could have been, or that could have made them. Journal entry number 3, May 3rd. I think I'm being hunted. Every time I stop to rest, I hear the same growling and scratching. I've seen glimpses of something moving in the shadows, but I can't get a good look at it, whatever it is. It's fast and incredibly strong. I'm starting to fear for my life. Journal entry number 4, May 4th. I saw it today. It was a creature unlike anything I've ever seen before. It was big, with dark fur and glowing eyes. It moved silently through the woods, stalking me like prey. I don't know how I managed to escape, but I ran until I collapsed. I can still hear it out there, searching for me. Journal entry number 5, May 5th. I've been running for days now. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The creature is relentless, always one step behind me. I'm exhausted and hungry, and I can feel my will to survive slipping away. But I have to keep going. I have to find a way out of these woods. Journal entry number 6, May 6th. I found a map in my backpack. I don't know how I missed it before. It shows a river not too far from where I am now. If I can follow that, I might be able to find my way out of the woods. But I have to be careful. The creature is still out there, waiting for me. Journal entry number 7, May 7th. Whew. I made it to the river. It wasn't easy, but I managed to lose the creature along the way. I am still so scared, but I feel like I might have a chance now. I'm going to follow the river until I find help. I don't know what I'll do if the creature finds me again, but I can't give up. I have to keep fighting. Journal entry number 8, May 8th. I walked along the river all day yesterday. I'm tired and my feet hurt, but I'm making progress. I haven't seen the creature since I left the woods, but I can't let my guard down. I need to find help soon. I'm starting to run low on food and water. Journal entry 9, May 9th. I came across a small campsite today. There was no one there, but there were some supplies left behind. I took what I needed and left a note in case the owners came back. It's a relief to have some extra food and water. I'm going to keep following the river and hope that I come across someone soon. Journal entry number 10, May 10th. I saw a helicopter flying overhead. I tried to signal for help, but I don't think they saw me. I'm going to keep moving and hope that they come back. I feel like I'm getting closer to civilization. The river is getting wider and there are signs of human activity along the banks. Journal entry number 11, May 11th. I made it to a small town today. I don't know where I am exactly, but it's a relief to be around people again. I went to a diner and had a hot meal. It was the best thing I've tasted in days. I'm going to try to find a phone so I can call for help. I don't want to be lost in the woods again. Journal entry number 12, May 12th. Something is wrong with this town. Everywhere I turn, I'm being watched by the people who seem to lack any kind of emotion. If I turn fast enough, I see the creature next to them. Journal entry number 13, May 13th. I don't know what's happening in this town, but I know I need to get out of here. Everywhere I go, I feel like I'm being watched. The people are strange and emotionless. I keep seeing glimpses of the creature. I managed to find a phone and try to call for help, but no one answered. I'm starting to feel like I'm in some kind of nightmare. Journal entry number 14, May 14th. I tried to leave the town today, but I couldn't find my way out. Every road I took led back to the same place. I think I'm trapped here. I don't know what to do. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind. Journal entry number 15, May 15th. I woke up in a strange room today. I don't know how I got here or who brought me here. The walls are covered in strange symbols and there's a strange smell in the air. I can hear strange noises outside the door. I think I'm in danger. I need to find a way out. I heard a phone ringing on the wall. I picked it up and heard a gravely voice say, "It sounds like you are experiencing a very difficult and scary situation. If you are truly in danger, it's important that you try to find help or a way to escape as soon as possible. If you have access to a form of communication, you could try calling for help or alerting someone you trust about your situation. If you are unable to leave the room or make contact with others, it may be helpful to try to stay calm and focus on your breathing. Remember that you are not alone. If you are able to reach out to someone for help, do not hesitate to do so." Then, the phone went silent. I'm not sure what to do. Journal entry number 16, May 16th. I managed to find a way out of the room. There was a trap door under the bed. I'm not sure where it leads, but I had no other choice. I crawled through it and found myself in a dark tunnel. I can hear the creature's footsteps echoing through the tunnel. I'm scared, but I have to keep moving. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I have to keep fighting for my survival. Journal entry number 17, May 27th. I made it after 11 days. I made it out of the building, and the creature is no longer chasing me. I don't know how I managed to survive, but I did. I stumbled upon a road and managed to flag down a passing car and dragged him out of the car. I was frozen with fear, but I knew I had to keep moving. I managed to jump out of the car and run as fast as I could. I could hear the creature's growls behind me, but I didn't look back. I kept running until I reached a small town. I collapsed in front of a convenience store and was taken to a hospital. I suffered from hallucinations, dehydration, exhaustion, and minor injuries. The doctors and nurses took care of me, and I was eventually released from the hospital. To this day, I don't know if what I went through was real, but I do know that when I get too close to the woods, I feel eyes on me. This location is a campground that may or may not be currently accessible. I knew it was closed, gated off from the road, for quite a while, a good few years ago. Factory Shoals Campground, a good 20 minutes outside of Covington, Georgia. Yes, that's where they filmed the Vampire Diaries. Anyway, Factory Shoals Recreation Area, the campground. I'll say that I've never seen many other people out at this huge park, even on the nicest days. But a friend lives in a subdivision down the road. The area is sporadically rural, if that makes sense. You'll come across a school, a gas station, and a pretty big neighborhood, but nothing else for another 6 or 7 minutes down the road. The campground is next to the Alcovy River. In order to reach it, you have to drive through Newton Factory Cemetery, an old cemetery with mostly older graves sitting on the side of the road, slightly hidden by the trees, smack in nowhere. I've often wondered about this. Graves date back to the 1800s. Maybe illegible ones or even older, I don't know. And at some point somebody says, "Hey, let's put a road through the cemetery and create a campground." So you go down this janky road through the cemetery about a quarter mile, and here you are. Barely managed campground. There's maybe 7 sites, mostly next to the river. I'm with a friend. It's a nice evening. The light bustling of the river is calming. There's only one other site occupied a bit down. No street lamps. The only light you have is the fire in your flashlight. So, when we were headed to bed, fire extinguished, it's pitch black. You can see the stars. There must not have been a moon that night. I'm laying down and close my eyes and realize it's too damn quiet. Deafening silence. I jump back up and go to my friend's tent and tell her I'm suddenly feeling creeped. We both realize the bugs and even the river has gone quiet. To be fair, the river is only about 8 feet across and about 2 feet deep here. We had commented on the peaceful lull of the river all through the evening. With curiosity stronger than fear, we walk over toward the water and observe a mist or fog lifting from the water. We are a little anxious and don't want to get right up on the bank to see if we can see the water moving. So my friend remembers a light up fishing lure type thing she has in her bag, fetches it, tosses it in, and it just sits there. It doesn't flow down. So it's like the river came to a complete stop in its movement. It is releasing a thick mist and it's completely dark and silent, except for that lure and its faint red glow barely visible through the thick mist. We both kind of start muttering that we should maybe pack up quick and leave before I see the spark and hear a gun firing not 15 feet away from us. Shine a light for a split second before we're both in the car. It's cranked, and we're tearing out of there. I didn't see anyone either from shining my light or from the headlights, and I about had a panic attack coming through the cemetery. After that, with the elongated shadows from headstones and monuments. I didn't sleep that night, even after crashing on my friend's couch. Logic tells me the quiet could have come from a prowling human with a gun. But the mist and a river current stopping? And what if the who or whatever followed us? I didn't even gather my tent and sleeping bag before going home the next day. I luckily had placed my bag in my car for some reason instead of taking it inside. So my only loss was the small old tent, the sleeping bag, a battery-powered lantern, and a camp chair. So it's maybe a year later and I'm in the area with my husband. And he doesn't believe me about a campground on the other side of a cemetery. It's midday and I decided to show him, pull up, see that the road is now blocked off beyond the graves with a sign that states the campground is currently closed. We get out a minute to walk around the cemetery. It's a dirt road. There's a lot of kicked up dust settling. So much so that my husband asks if there's water in my trunk. He's coughing. I go to get it, cursing under my breath at the thick layer of settled dust already on my precious sports car, and notice a very clean and distinct fresh tiny handprint on my trunk. It had to be fresh because I stood there and watched the still settling dirt start to stick and fill it in. We never made it more than a few feet from the car. There's nobody else out there. Again, we booked it the hell out of there. I know there's a legend about parking cars on hills in certain areas at night, and you'll find little handprints on the back of your car will have moved. My car didn't move, but those were legit fresh little handprints. I'm not sure if the cemetery brings playful souls. The entire area holds on to some type of energy. or there's just some incredibly sneaky people that hang out in minimally trafficked woods and back roads. I'll reiterate that this is a part of a park, a recreational area that has grills and picnic tables about 3 minutes down the road. And I never saw anyone there a few times I visited aside from my friend, husband, and the other tent I saw further down the river when we tried to camp. I've never gone back. I've been to other places in Newton County, though that gives off similar vibes. The Alcavie Trestle, Gaither Plantation, a random church smack dab in the middle of the woods, that creepy ass old gas station. So, there's my story. As you may have guessed, I sure in the hell am not visiting these places ever again because I do not want to find out what resides there. I was hiking in the Catskills. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I come up to the Catskills fairly regularly throughout the year because sometimes the Poconos just get a little boring. I started at the trailhead parking lot where I parked my car and began walking up the same trail that I've walked up 1,000 times. After about an hour, I started to feel kind of weird. It felt like the woods were a little bit quieter than they usually were when I had come up here before. But I wasn't initially very concerned about it. After I sat down to have breakfast, I started hearing rustling above me, and some sticks fell down right behind me. I wasn't really worried about this either, as I just assumed it was some squirrels running around or some chipmunks throwing things at me. This has happened to me before. I finished my breakfast without incident and kept walking toward the summit. This was fairly early in the morning, around 6 a.m., so I would think there would be a lot of birds chirping and a lot of other activity. But things just kept getting quieter and quieter as I ascended. This definitely creeped me out, but I tried to push it out of my mind because I've already been hiking for a while at this point, and I'm definitely not turning around. Eventually, more sticks fell to my right, somewhere close to me, and they sounded heavier. These were the kind of small twigs that would generally fall from squirrel activity. I went over and checked them, and these were fairly substantial. This continued to happen in a higher frequency until I finally reached the end of the trail. On my way back, it happened continuously, increasing in frequency as I descended, until suddenly it just kind of stopped when I was about a mile from the car. When I finally returned to my car, I found all the doors open, and it seemed like a lot of my stuff had been very violently rummaged through. I had a bag in there with some of my clothes in it, and this had been torn up. A lot of my clothes were outside of the car, leading back into the woods. I thought about calling the police, but I live in Philadelphia, so I knew there wasn't really anything that was going to happen. To this day, I still get freaked out when I think about it. I don't necessarily think it was connected, but I do feel really uneasy about both of these things happening at the same time again. Then again, maybe I was just robbed. I don't know. I haven't gone back to that place to figure it out. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these true, creepy backwoods stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you well. If you're awake and listening, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, I'll read to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good